May I speak in the name of the one holy and undivided Trinity. Amen. I love when we get to hear in our Sunday liturgy scripture reading from the letter of James. It's not that often. And, James's letter has had a dubious history in biblical studies. Throughout the ages, many theologians have wished that it were not in the canon of Scripture, most notably the great reformer Martin Luther. But I love hearing our scripture selections from James, basically because it always seems to me he just says it like it is, and he doesn't mince any words. Normally, he's in the sections we hear, he's not really talking about lofty theological concepts, but just simply how do we live out our Christian faith in the world around us. And today's selection, of course, is no exception to that. James, in today's reading, is essentially saying something very simple. You cannot be friends with the world and friends with God. It's one or the other. And that may sound very jarring and especially distressing to those of us who like to be friends to everybody. But what James is not saying, let's begin there, James is not saying that we are not called to lovingly care for all the people of the world, good and bad alike. And James is not saying that we should not rejoice in the beauty of the created world around us and give thanks for all that natural beauty in which we live. What James is saying is that whenever we espouse the values of this world, which are centered in, it used to say jealousy, now this translation says in bitter envy and selfish ambition. When we enter those values of the world, we lose sight of the realm of God. Because, let's face it, the world rewards the powerful and the proud, and it walks over the humble. If you disagree with me, I just challenge you to turn on the news any given night. Take a look. But James says that God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. Let me talk a little bit about those two phrases, the pride and humility, because they're very nuanced in our language, and they have a lot of different connotations. When we talk about not being proud, we're not saying have no sense of self-worth. Because even the humble have a great sense of self-worth. They value the self of everyone who God has created, including themselves. No, the pride we're talking about is what he describes there. It's marked by bitter envy and selfish ambition. And likewise, humility sometimes gets a stereotype of the humble, or people who everyone else walks over them, controls their actions, everybody but themselves. No. The humble are not human doormats. And they oftentimes have a very clear sense of self, or have resolute wills, and are not walked over. So if selfish ambition and bitter envy are the mark of the proud, how do we recognize the humble? What do they look like? Well, he spells it out right there. If you look from that second reading in James, the second reading from the letter of James, about in the middle, halfway down, he says, he describes the humble as being filled with the wisdom from above. And he says that wisdom is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. Some of those can make us squirm. And so when we think about this, what we realize is that in all, he talks about the divisions and the arguments that we have with one another, in all of our debates, of which we seem just flooded continuously, whether it's over who controls a woman's reproductive tract, or issues of sexuality and gender identity, or how we treat immigrants and undocumented, to whether we go to war or not. All of these things in which we are called to witness to truth. Of course, the fact is we all witness to different truths, don't we? That's why we have arguments and debates. But he's saying that in all of those, God opposes the proud, even when we are right. And that just hits me in the gut, because I love to be right. I always love to be right, and I usually am. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel proud. And Scripture says that God opposes the proud, even when we're right. Right should count for something, shouldn't it? But Scripture says that God gives grace to the humble, even when we may be misguided. And that's reassuring. We don't always have to get it right. But we need to be filled with these marks of humility. So how does this fit in with that gospel reading that we just heard? Well, I think about in every way conceivably possible. I mean, think about that scene. The disciples are walking along on the road, and they get into an argument. Jesus says, what were you arguing about? Over who is the greatest. You see, James didn't need to look, if he was looking for personal examples, real-life human examples of this selfish envy, and bitter envy and selfish ambition, he didn't have to look beyond Jesus' chosen 12. They're totally buying into the values of the world. And they're arguing about who's the greatest. Who knows why? It must have seemed like a logical thing for them to be talking about. I can't imagine that argument wasn't heated. And I'd love to hear their reasons about why each one should be the greatest. You know, perhaps they were trying to figure out who would be Jesus' right-hand man in his establishing of the messianic kingdom on earth. If they'd been listening to him talking about his upcoming death, maybe they were wondering who his successor would be. Who would be the leader after he was gone? I don't know. Maybe they were afraid that there was going to be a merger between Jesus' disciples and John the Baptist, and how would that all play out? Or that the apostolic band was going to there was going to be a downsizing, and it was like who makes the cut, who has to re-audition. We don't know. But what's clear is that they quickly got sidetracked from the values of the realm of God into the values of the world. Bitter envy and selfish ambition. And what does Jesus do to get them back on track? Well, we're told that first off he sits down, and that may seem inconsequential, but it's not, because sitting was the posture that a rabbi took to deliver his teaching. His disciples would stand around him, and he would sit. So Jesus sits down, essentially saying, listen up. I'm going to teach you something. And then he takes a child into his arms and says, whoever welcomes, and again, a lot of difference in the translation, you say receives, whoever welcomes one such child as this welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. Now, just like words change in meaning over years and centuries, so do images. And it's very important for us to remember that, and especially in this context, because I think society at large, I know at least when I think of the image of a child, I connote that with cuteness and innocence and purity. Does that sound fair of images that come to mind when you think of a child? Not so in ancient Palestine. In Jesus' day, it's important to remember that children had no more rights than slaves and were often treated similarly. So the image that someone thought of in connection with a child had more to do with complete powerlessness. Children had no power, and vulnerability. They were completely vulnerable to the goodwill of their parents, or if they lost them, to wherever they would end up. And so, when Jesus wraps his arms around a child and says, whenever you welcome one such as this, you welcome me. He's not saying whenever you welcome the cute and the innocent and the pure, you have welcomed God. But whenever you welcome the powerless and the vulnerable. That's quite a different image. So, which is it? Friend of the world, friend of God. Where do we fall on any given day, on any given moment? How do we know which way we're going? Well, I think that the scriptures this morning help us out a lot in that regard. James reminds us that whenever we find ourselves succumbing to this desire for selfish ambition, being the one on top, and bitter envy. I wish I had what they had. I wish I had the popularity they had, or the money they had, all those things. Whenever we go down that road, we are getting farther and farther away from the values of the realm of God. And whenever we start moving towards, because I don't know about you, but I don't think on my best day I can fulfill all of these marks of humility. But when we start moving towards purity of heart, peaceableness, gentleness, when we're willing to yield, wouldn't we like to see that in our political world? When we're full of mercy and good fruits without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy, well then we can bet our bottom dollar we're becoming better buddies with God. And then Jesus in the gospel also points out that the friends of God, the humble, are those who welcome the powerless and the vulnerable. And you know, such a person is quite a threat to the world, and often the world finds ways to either silence or discredit them. But we gather week by week as a community of faith to support and raise up such people who welcome the powerless and the vulnerable. In fact, we even try to become such people with God's help.